Have you ever hit that dreadful wall, pushing yourself with every self-help trick in the book, yet still feeling an empty space inside you? Our guest today knows that feeling all too well. In 2023, his world collapsed, orphaned since 16. No real friends, a girlfriend who walked away, dead-end jobs that drained his soul, and zero money to fall back on. He tried every popular life hack, every gym routine, every productivity ritual, and still felt stuck. It wasn't until he discovered one missing piece, inner balance and unshakable belief, that everything finally changed. Have you ever felt completely stuck in life, even after you've tried everything possible to change your circumstances? Perhaps you've invested countless hours into self-help books, podcasts, exercise routines, and even healthy diets, only to find that something crucial still feels missing. The protagonist of today's story knows exactly what that's like, because in 2023, he found himself at the absolute lowest point of his life. It wasn't just an ordinary setback. For him, rock bottom meant feeling completely alone and disconnected from the world around him. Having lost both his parents in a tragic accident at a young age, he'd spent years convincing himself that independence and hard work would eventually lead to success and happiness. But instead, reality kept hitting him harder each day. Friends drifted away, relationships crumbled, and his girlfriend, who once promised to stay by his side, finally walked away, leaving him more isolated than ever before. Financially, he was barely surviving. Picture living paycheck to paycheck, not in a metaphorical sense, but literally counting spare change to fill the gas tank of his motorbike just to get to work each day. His jobs weren't prestigious or fulfilling, they were simply necessary for survival. Warehouse shifts that stretched long into the night, cleaning offices in empty buildings after everyone had gone home, and working in bustling fast food restaurants where managers treated him as though he was disposable. Each day felt like an endless cycle of meaningless tasks, slowly draining his sense of self-worth. Emotionally, the toll was even heavier. Living alone in a tiny rented room, he often found himself staring at the ceiling in the darkness, anxiety gripping him tightly, wondering if this cycle would ever end. It wasn't just sadness, it was a profound sense of hopelessness. A belief that no matter how hard he worked, he was never good enough. Every morning was a struggle just to rise from bed and face another day of exhausting, unfulfilling labor. But within that deep sense of despair, there was still a flicker of determination. Driven by the belief ingrained in his upbringing, that hard work can eventually overcome anything, he pushed himself even harder. He read motivational books, listened to self-help gurus, and adopted popular habits like exercising regularly, journaling, and cutting out junk food. He had convinced himself that if he could just work harder, smarter, and longer, he'd finally break free from this suffocating cycle. Yet despite all these efforts, nothing seemed to truly change. Sure, his body got healthier, and his mind felt clearer. But deep within his heart, something essential was still missing. It felt as though he had assembled all the pieces of a puzzle. But the final piece, the one that would bring everything together, was nowhere to be found. Looking back, he now understands that hitting rock bottom wasn't just about suffering or hardship, it was a powerful turning point. It forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth, that simply doing more wasn't enough. The solution he needed wasn't external. It wasn't about how much effort he put in, how many hours he logged, or how disciplined he became. Instead, the true change would come from someplace deeper, in inner balance. A missing sense of purpose and belief that he had yet to discover. And so began his journey, not outward, but inward. When you've hit rock bottom, the natural response is to do everything in your power to climb back up. Our protagonist was no different. After recognizing the depths of his despair, he embarked on an intense journey of self-improvement, believing that sheer effort and discipline would eventually lead him to happiness and success. His first step was familiar. He turned to the gym. The gym, after all, symbolized self-discipline, strength, and control. Every morning at 5 a.m., he'd wake up before sunrise, lace up his worn-out sneakers, and head out to a local gym he could barely afford. In those early hours, when the city was still sleeping, he'd push himself through endless sets of push-ups, pull-ups, and lifting weights, hoping physical strength would translate into emotional resilience. He believed firmly that if his body became strong enough, perhaps his mind would follow. Alongside exercise, he embraced reading like never before. Books became his trusted companions. Lining the small bookshelf in his tiny room, he immersed himself in the classics of personal growth, titles by authors such as Tony Robbins, James Clear, and Robin Sharma became his daily dose of inspiration. Each page seemed to offer promises of transformation, habits that could reshape his life, productivity hacks that promised efficiency, and mindsets that would supposedly lead him out of the darkness. He took meticulous notes, highlighted entire chapters, and even repeated quotes to himself each morning, convinced these words held the key to his redemption. But he didn't stop there. Determined to cover every angle, he radically transformed his diet. He eliminated junk food, swapped cheap instant noodles and greasy street meals for home-cooked rice, vegetables, and lean protein. He began preparing his own meals meticulously every night, trying to nourish his body as much as his mind. Health, he thought, was surely a critical step toward overall well-being. He also discovered journaling, a habit he'd never previously considered. Every evening, beneath the flickering light of his old desk lamp, he'd pour out his heart onto blank pages. These journals held his deepest fears, frustrations, and fleeting moments of hope. It became therapeutic, a private ritual where he could express feelings he didn't dare share with anyone else. Each written line was like shedding a small piece of the emotional weight he'd carried for years. Months passed, and these practices started to show results. At least outwardly. Physically, he became leaner, stronger, and visibly healthier. His discipline and productivity improved dramatically. Friends and acquaintances began to compliment his new physique and applaud his dedication. On the surface, it seemed as if he'd finally found his way out. Yet, deep inside, he knew something vital was still missing. Despite the positive habits, the newfound physical strength, and even the increased mental clarity, he still felt profoundly empty. It was as if he had carefully rebuilt the external structures of his life. But beneath this polished exterior, there remained a void that self-help techniques alone couldn't fill. He often wondered, I've done everything right, why'd I still feel incomplete? It wasn't that these habits were ineffective. They had certainly helped, but they weren't the final solution he sought. Beneath the organized routines and disciplined actions, something deeper remained unresolved. That quiet voice inside kept whispering. Perhaps it wasn't a matter of working harder or adding more routines. Perhaps the piece he was missing was something entirely different, something more profound than physical fitness, diet, or even disciplined productivity. Little did he know, the breakthrough he was desperately searching for was just around the corner, and it wouldn't come from more effort, but from an entirely different direction altogether. After months of disciplined routines and endless self-help practices, our protagonist found himself facing a puzzling contradiction. Physically healthier and mentally sharper than ever. He should have felt satisfied, proud even, but instead, he felt profoundly empty. It was a paradox that puzzled and frustrated him deeply. After all, hadn't he done everything right? Where was the happiness, the fulfillment, the inner peace these habits were supposed to deliver? Night after night, he would sit alone in his small room, surrounded by neatly stacked books, meticulous journals filled with his thoughts, and inspirational quotes pinned carefully to his wall. Yet despite all these outward symbols of self-improvement, he still experienced a lingering sense of emptiness. It was a nagging feeling, one he couldn't shake off simply by pushing himself harder or adding yet another habit to his already exhaustive routine. One particularly sleepless night, as he lay staring at the ceiling, a sudden realization hit him with startling clarity. His problem wasn't lack of discipline or effort. It was a spiritual void, a lack of belief in something bigger than himself. For years, since losing his parents at 16, he'd closed himself off emotionally, shutting out the possibility of trust, faith, and deeper connection. He realized he had stopped believing, not only in a higher power but also in humanity, in relationships, and, most painfully, in himself. Up until this point, he had approached life with relentless logic and hustle. He believed wholeheartedly in the power of action, discipline, and effort to overcome adversity. But that night, he finally understood the harsh truth. His internal world lacked depth, purpose, and genuine belief. Beneath the surface of productivity and external achievement, His spirit had been left unattended, starved for nourishment and true alignment. Acknowledging this spiritual emptiness wasn't easy. It felt vulnerable, even uncomfortable, but the moment he recognized it, he also felt a surprising sense of relief, as if he'd finally uncovered the true root of his persistent dissatisfaction. He realized he'd spent years treating symptoms, trying to fix external problems like finances, fitness, and productivity, but he'd completely overlooked the internal wounds caused by isolation, loss, and spiritual disconnection. Initially unsure of how to address this newfound awareness, he began seeking answers outside the familiar territory of productivity hacks and habit trackers. He ventured into sections of bookstores he'd previously ignored: spirituality, philosophy, and mindfulness, and allowed himself to read books that spoke directly to the soul rather than just the mind. It was unfamiliar territory, but strangely comforting. One particular book stood out, profoundly shifting his perspective. Its core message was simple yet powerful. True fulfillment doesn't arise solely from disciplined action or mental resilience. Instead, it emerges from alignment, aligning your inner world with your outer reality. He learned that genuine change and lasting peace don't just come from external routines. They come from deeply connecting to something greater than yourself, be it faith, spirituality, or simply believing in a meaningful purpose beyond the everyday grind. This realization didn't instantly solve all his problems, but it planted the seeds of profound change. He began experimenting with simple spiritual practices, meditation, moments of quiet reflection, and even cautious, heartfelt prayers. These small acts weren't aimed at improving productivity or physical health. Instead, they were designed purely to heal and nurture his inner world. Slowly but surely, something within him began to shift. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but gradually, he noticed a sense of peace he'd never experienced before. The emptiness started to fade, replaced by a quiet strength, a subtle but powerful sense of inner alignment. He finally understood. The peace he'd been missing wasn't another self-help routine, it was spiritual connection, belief, and inner alignment. And for the first time in many years, he felt hope, not based on external effort alone, but rooted deeply in something much bigger and infinitely more meaningful. Recognizing the spiritual void was merely the beginning of a transformative journey for our protagonist. Having spent years relying purely on hustle, logic, and external discipline, shifting toward spirituality felt unfamiliar, yet intriguingly comforting. The idea of alignment, of genuinely connecting with something deeper, resonated profoundly with him, becoming the pivotal turning point he'd unknowingly searched for his entire life. Initially, stepping into this new territory wasn't easy. Raised to rely solely on action, strategy, and measurable outcomes, he was naturally skeptical of concepts like spiritual alignment, manifestation, or faith. However, his previous methods had left him feeling empty and stuck, compelling him to give this new perspective a sincere chance. One evening, while browsing through a local bookstore, he stumbled across a book unlike the others he'd previously encountered. Its title hinted at spiritual manifestation and alignment, concepts that had always seemed vague or abstract. Hesitantly, he flipped through its pages, unsure yet curious. What he found inside surprised him deeply. The book didn't just speak of routines or positive thinking. It introduced a different dimension entirely: the alignment of intention, action, and belief. Its message was clear. True transformation arises not simply from effort or mindset but from cultivating deep spiritual coherence within oneself. Intrigued, he began integrating the book's insights into his daily life. Each morning, instead of merely reviewing his goals or tasks, he paused briefly to connect internally. He embraced quiet moments of meditation, letting go of the frantic pace that previously defined his mornings. Before meals, he practiced simple acts of gratitude, something he'd never truly considered before. And in the evenings, he dedicated a few minutes to silent prayer, sincerely seeking guidance and expressing genuine gratitude rather than just asking for results or outcomes. Gradually, subtle yet unmistakable changes began emerging within him. His constant anxiety, the tight knot of worry that previously seemed permanent, began to ease. Sleep came more naturally, uninterrupted by restless thoughts. Moments of clarity increased, making his daily tasks feel less overwhelming and more purposeful. Even his relationships subtly shifted. friends and colleagues commented that he seemed lighter, calmer, and more at peace. He realized that this newfound inner calm wasn't merely psychological, it felt profoundly spiritual. But the greatest transformation wasn't external, it was an internal shift. Previously, he had approached life like a relentless struggle, constantly forcing outcomes through sheer determination and hard work. Now, he found himself experiencing life differently, less like a battle to be won and more like a natural flow to be embraced. It was as though, by aligning spiritually, he'd become a magnet for positivity and opportunity rather than having to constantly chase them. Opportunities, large and small, started appearing unexpectedly. New job offers, meaningful connections, and moments of spontaneous kindness from others. Remarkably, he felt no need to chase after these blessings. Instead, they arrived naturally, seemingly drawn to his newfound sense of inner harmony. He came to understand a crucial truth. Spiritual alignment wasn't about abandoning discipline or hard work. It was about harmonizing them with deeper purpose and meaning. This alignment provided a foundational peace he'd never known before, allowing effort and intention to become effective without exhausting his spirit. For the first time, his efforts felt meaningful rather than burdensome. He finally understood why all his prior attempts, despite their intensity and discipline, had felt incomplete. They were missing the crucial ingredient of inner alignment. Now, with spiritual coherence at the core, everything felt connected, purposeful, and deeply satisfying. In discovering spiritual alignment, he didn't just find a new habit or temporary inspiration. He found a sustainable foundation for true fulfillment and lasting change. The journey from emptiness to alignment transformed not just his circumstances, but more importantly, his sense of self, purpose, and genuine happiness. From this profound journey of hitting rock bottom, exploring every self-improvement habit, recognizing his spiritual emptiness, and finally embracing inner alignment, our protagonist uncovered a powerful and life-changing lesson. True transformation isn't solely the result of endless hustle, but rather emerges naturally through alignment with deeper purpose and genuine belief. Previously, he had always associated success with relentless effort, late nights, and an ever-growing to-do list. The culture he lived in reinforced this idea continuously, praising productivity, hustle, and sacrifice as essential virtues. He had followed this belief system loyally, yet all it did was push him into burnout, anxiety, and spiritual emptiness. But after experiencing the profound changes brought by spiritual alignment, he understood something crucial. Real fulfillment and sustainable success don't come from constant striving alone. Instead, they're rooted deeply in authenticity, harmony, and genuine spiritual coherence. This realization didn't imply abandoning ambition or discipline, rather, it shifted his perception entirely. He learned that effort without alignment was like trying to swim upstream, exhausting and eventually overwhelming, while alignment allowed him to flow naturally downstream, making each stroke purposeful and effortless. Reflecting on his past struggles, he saw clearly how much unnecessary pain he'd endured by believing that working harder and sacrificing more was always the answer. He had misunderstood the true nature of productivity and happiness. Productivity without alignment had drained him, leaving him emotionally exhausted and spiritually depleted. However, once he embraced inner alignment, his efforts felt meaningful, naturally motivated by passion and clarity rather than obligation or fear. He realized this approach was not only healthier but significantly more powerful. Opportunities started coming to him without the exhausting chase. Work became genuinely enjoyable, infused with purpose and energy rather than pressure and stress. Even challenging moments didn't seem daunting. Instead, they became meaningful parts of his personal and spiritual growth. The distinction was profound. In alignment, he no longer felt as though he was fighting life. Instead, he felt as if life was working alongside him, guiding him forward effortlessly. He began sharing his experiences subtly with friends and colleagues, noticing how universally resonant his story became. Many people confessed privately that they, too, felt trapped by society's expectations of constant productivity, silently struggling beneath the veneer of busyness and achievement. His transformation inspired those around him not just to rethink their habits but to reconnect with deeper spiritual truths they'd forgotten in the pursuit of external validation. From his journey, he distilled one critical insight: Alignment doesn't mean passivity or inaction. It simply means that your actions arise from an authentic connection with your inner self and purpose. When you're spiritually aligned, your external achievements become natural byproducts of your internal harmony. Success, happiness, and inner peace become sustainable and fulfilling rather than fleeting or superficial. Finally, our protagonist came to deeply appreciate the value of pausing regularly, reflecting inwardly, and nurturing spiritual alignment daily. He made a conscious choice to prioritize these practices above simply increasing workload or external obligations. He understood clearly that maintaining spiritual alignment required continuous mindfulness, regular reflection, and intentional actions grounded in authenticity. The journey taught him a profound truth: if you feel stuck despite endless efforts, maybe the solution isn't more hustle, discipline, or productivity hacks. Maybe what you truly need is to pause, reconnect with yourself spiritually, and realign your inner world before taking the next step. After all, genuine fulfillment and lasting success begin not with endless external effort, but with profound internal alignment and authentic spiritual connection. By embracing this truth, he transformed not only his life but also became an inspiring example for others searching for deeper meaning, balance, and sustainable happiness. In the end, his story reminds us that fulfillment isn't a prize awarded to the busiest hustler. It's a natural result of living in honest alignment with our deepest values. When purpose, belief, and effort move in the same direction, work feels lighter, challenges turn into lessons, and opportunities arrive without force. So if you find yourself exhausted by endless striving, pause and look inward first. Realign before you add another task. Because once your inner compass points true north, success stops feeling like an uphill crawl and starts flowing quietly, powerfully, straight toward you.